They ate, and Osrith felt happy, happy that she was so close to Dunnottar, happy she had been accepted here, though the Norse were her enemy. As the temperature fell, and the warriors were gathering together to sleep, Osrith wondered where she should rest. Osrith, Eirik whispered, pulling her wrist as she made her way to the now snoring Norseman. Though you are a warrior, the men do not know you yet. You will sleep beside me, as we did last night. She nodded, feeling relieved to be out of the snow, and she glanced back to Slipner, who had carried them so far in such cold conditions. The moon must have been full, or close to, and its light shone on the black mare. The man called Edikop, who had tried to steal her sword, was feeding her. And the next morning, as she awoke next to Eirik, under canvas, Osrith realized that it was Christmas morning, and on what could only have been the Forth River, 3 ships were sailing into Dunnottar. 88,888,888. They were not going to attack that day, but feast on the supplies Siegfried had stolen from a raid up the Clyde. If Eochaid is your ally, you stole from him. And the Strathclyde Cymru killed some of your men, Osrith replied, after Eirik had told her. Christmas Day, which was much milder than the last 2 days had been, and the Norse were busy singing and feasting. Him, yes, we fight with him, the deposed king, then overthrow him too. What can he do about food we raided? He grinned at Osrith's serious face. Relax, it's Jaldag. He clapped her on the back. Your Christmas. Drink, warrior woman, eat. Osrith did drink, though she insisted it be boiled spring water, and ate Eochaid's winter store with them. As the sun rose on a snowy landscape, Osrith could pick Putkuldi's monastery on the southern bank of the Forth, and Dunnottar on the north. Tomorrow, there would be slaughter. But, she could not have prevented it otherwise. And by sharing intelligence of Eochaid and Greogoia's betrayal, she would be able to put Domhnall at an advantage. The Norse, then, hoped that by siding with the Strathclyde Cymru, they could defeat the Gaelish Scots, Domhnall, Constantine, and their Garden army. He had probably told Eochaid he would be able to make him king again. But she now knew Siegfried would have the throne of Alba for his own, so probably planned to turn on Eochaid once Domhnall was beaten. As the sun began its downwards path towards the western sky, Osrith watched the Norse fight amongst themselves, watched them wrestle, watched them make a line in the snow and mud and draw on a bridle, teams of 10, 12, men fitting into 2 predetermined teams, with Eirik on one side, Siegfried the other. It was pretty even, and remained so, inching over the line, first one way and then the other, mud coating the men's legs, as they belched and roared at the amusement. It was growing dark, and the men were still tugging, so Osrith decided to make her way back to Eirik's tent. As she stepped towards one of the ropes, a man stood in her way. It was Edikop. Come on, Page, he encouraged menacingly, and then, Osrith realized, as the man craned his arms and moved his legs wide as she tried to pass, why he was called the Spider. He was trying to corner her. Osrith fell as she drew Buet from her scabbard, and she held the blade out protectively as she tried to scrabble in the mud and snow for a surface on which she could regain her feet. But Edikop kicked her legs away as he dropped his breeches, watching her face as he stood there, his not unimpressive cock inches from her face. When she hadn't shrieked in terror, the Spider was offended, and made to grab at Osrith, who was parrying Buet in his direction. She managed to scrabble back, but then the Spider fell, over a tent rope, landing on Osrith's blade. Behind him, Siegfried stood. Osrith looked at the Norseman in horror, as Edikop rolled away, dead. My lord, Osrith began, but the Norseman held up a hand. I could not trust him, and he has just proved that to me. Behind him, Eirik stood, his eyes on Osrith. Tomorrow you will guide us to the king's fortress. Then, if any of my men catch you. Osrith nodded. He meant she was fair game. But, so were they. And now, at least, this Northman leader could see she had not retaliated whilst under their agreement, when she could so easily have chopped off a body part from the stupid man, who had just been standing there, ogling her. where would she be sleeping the next night? That was the thought running through Osrith's mind as Eric breathed rhythmically in his sleep and snow dropped in clumps outside. It had been a strange comfort to be next to him, an ally as well as an enemy. And she was within sight of Dunotter, of Domhnall, who needed to know about Griogr. She could never have hoped to have got there so swiftly had she been alone. Eric had fed her, helped her bathe, bound her breasts so she could fight more easily. Gently, Osrith reached for his arm, grasping it lightly for a moment, before curling up in her cloak. In the morning, riding before Eric on Sleipnir, Osrith made a point of telling Siegfried they were on the correct path, following the northern bank of the Forth and heading east. Then, she rode in silence as the day progressed. As they trod steadfastly and swiftly along the Droves paths, little swirlets of snow danced around them, but the weather was growing warmer and little lay in the lee of the trees. And, as the afternoon drew on, another army rode, in the far distance, whose path would converge with that of the Norse in a few miles. Just before the dense forest that lay to the west of Dunotter, Osrith looked at the back of Siegfried Thorgilsson. He had shaded with her the truth. Presumably, Osrith considered, because he did not truly believe she could do anything to stop his plan. And now, Dunotter within a few hours' walk, Osrith was not entirely convinced she could, either. As they drew to a stop, Osrith made to slip from the saddle. Beside her ear, Eric whispered, "You could stay with us tonight, little warrior. You could leave to your king tomorrow." In the saddle, Osrith turned. "I must leave now, this is what we agreed." And, if she stayed, and they were to join with the Strathclyde Cymru, and if Griogr was amongst those men, she would undoubtedly show the Norse violence and cruelty, viciousness and savagery. "It is what we agreed," Siegfried agreed, turning to Osrith. "Although, you believe we would keep our agreement, Griogr?" He leered at her. "We will let her go," Eric declared, "for she will fly up to that castle and tell her king that his enemies are close. And then, Griogr," Siegfried continued, "there will be a battle and whoever will win that battle will be tired and reduced in number." Osrith slipped from Sleipnir, patting the horse's side. She had been a gentle, placid horse, and Osrith wished she had been a better horsewoman. "Goodbye, Surefoot," she whispered, beginning to walk. 2 hours, following the river bank, and she would be opposite Dunotter, in almost the same place she had lost her adopted family with whom the abbot at Culdees had placed her, and where she had saved Constantine from death. How would she be received when she got there? What if Domhnall had, indeed, agreed with Griogr that she would be Guthred's bride? Yet the man was Domhnall's enemy, and planned to take his throne. Suddenly, it made sense. He had agreed to siding with the Norse, for numbers. Eric had agreed to be hostage, and he had been imprisoned, weakening the Norse, so there were enough Northmen to aid them, but not enough to overcome the Cymru, and ultimately, Griogr. The only flaw in his plan that Osrith could see was Eochaid. It was through the king of Strathclyde Griogr, Giric, claimed legitimacy. Maybe he was going to claim Eochaid gave up his crown to him, and have him finished off peacefully. All this, she needed to take to Domhnall. And then there was tag. When she had offloaded her information to Domhnall, Osrith knew she would have room in her head to think about her hand husband. Osrith was aware there were footsteps behind her, and was not surprised to feel a hand on her shoulder. She made to pull Buey, but Eric, for it was he, put his hand to her wrist. Behind him, hoots and whistles were being sounded from the Norse. "I will turn from you on battlefield. Should I face you, I will not strike," Osrith said, smiling. "Nor are you, little warrior." Osrith felt Eric loose her wrist, and she reached to her hair, pulling out the silver and pearl jewel. "Keep it. It is from your land. It looks better on you." "Thank you, Eric Thorgilsson. I will never forget you." And she turned, heading east. Behind her, she heard Siegfried shout, "I do not believe you kept your hands off her, Eric." He was striding back to his kin. Osrith stared down Siegfried, who grinned at her. "If I capture her, little brother, she will know about it." Osrith made sure he could see she had her hand on Buey. "Safe passages over Griogr." He continued to shout, "If you fight by your king, I will kill you. I will kill you. He shouted again, waving his dagger in the air, then mimicked cutting his throat, before pointing to Osrith. Not if I kill you first, shouted back Osrith in English, holding up Bua, then repeating it in Danish, Gaelish and Cymric. If I catch you, Siegfried continued, my cock will find out whether you can fight. He bent his elbow and held his forearm up to Osrith, imitating an erection. Behind her, there was laughter. Osrith turned back. She had traveled with Norse and survived. But she couldn't think about that now. Griotger, he was alive, and he was a traitor. Osrith had her king to find.